please welcome Leland Melvin in conversation with the award-winning journalist David Matthews.
We are all educators in some way. We can teach something. We have some skill or some knowledge to give back. It's what fuels my desire to help inspire that next generation of explorers. I'm Leland Melvin. This is my magazine.
Leland, what a pleasure to be on stage with you. I had originally a whole worked out scheme of things. Q&A, highly structured, etc., etc., etc. That's gone completely out the window because I got to say, and I'm sure it's the same for many of you out here who have grown up at various stages of various space programs, that to meet someone who has been out there.
Literally been out there.
Yeah, not once, but twice.
Right.
It's quite something. You know, I don't usually meet people like you down my local pub. So
Had a couple of pints last night.
Right. So I'm a little bit awestruck in that sense. But what I find really incredible about you and is your journey, is how you got to where you got to, and let's face it, where you're going. So the first thing I want to ask you is, how the hell does an NFL player get into space? How did that happen?
Well, first thing, getting to the NFL, I was one of those 18%. I was in a small town, so that the data from our previous speaker is very accurate. I was one of these kids where I played football, basketball, and tennis. I loved all sports, but it was when I was in 6th grade, my mother gave me a chemistry set, and this was one of these age-inappropriate chemistry sets, you know, for a young kid to mix two chemicals and create an explosion in my mother's living room that actually burned a hole in her carpet. That fueled my curiosity to become a scientist. And so the sports piece, my dad was, you know, teaching me how to catch and throw and do all these things, but it was my mom who got my chemistry and science side fueled. And so at that early age, I saw there were two paths I could take, and both of them could be taken if you had the knowledge. And in high school, I played football, dropped a touchdown pass in the end zone when a college scout was in the stands. Now, that one drop pass could have resulted in a $180,000 scholarship.
Wow.
Went to the sideline, my coach, Jimmy Green, who believed in me, said, "Get back out there and catch the ball." I went back out there. This time I'm running down the sideline, the ball's in the air, the crowd's screaming. I'm thinking, don't drop the ball again. You will be an idiot, you know. And I catch this ball. The college scout now, who had walked out of the stadium, heard the crowd screaming for the second time and saw me in the end zone doing a little dance after I caught the touchdown. And he said, well, if this guy can recover after such a horrific failure, maybe he can play for us. And so that one moment in time in high school taught me a huge lesson about not giving up, having that wherewithal to keep going and believe in yourself even when, sometimes other people don't believe in you.
Yeah.
And so that tenet ran throughout my entire life. So getting from college, playing college sports on a really bad team, to then winning, college pro scouts came and looked at me, saw I could still catch and throw and run. I got drafted to the Detroit Lions in the 11th round in the 1986 NFL draft. Pulled a hamstring in training camp pretty bad, bounced around with the Lions and the Dallas Cowboys, and then ended up getting a master's degree in material science engineering and working at NASA as a research scientist. And so this is when, as a child, you think about the Apollo astronauts, the Right Stuff, test pilots, crew cuts. None of them were African American. I never saw someone that looked like me that was flying in space. So I never imagined myself being an astronaut or flying in space as a child. And it wasn't until I was working at NASA that my buddy said, hey, you'd be a great astronaut. You're a scientist, you're a team player, all these things. And he hands me an application. He says, you should fill this out and become an astronaut. I'm like, yeah, right.
I wish people would say that to me.
Right, yeah, you fill it out, you can become an astronaut. And I didn't fill it out, but that same year, a friend of mine, Charlie Camarda, he filled out the application, and he got in. So at that point, I said to myself, wait a minute. If NASA's letting knuckleheads like Charlie Camarda in to be astronauts, maybe I can do the same thing. So the next selection, I applied and I got in. And from that point on, it was the most incredible ride of training, living and working in Russia with the cosmonauts, flying jets, doing all these things. And then around in 2003, I was working in education at NASA headquarters, and we lost the Space Shuttle Columbia. Many of you remember the Columbia accident. And I'll never forget the night of the accident, my friend's father, David Brown's father, he said to me, my son is gone. There is nothing you can do to bring him back, but the biggest tragedy would be if we don't continue to fly in space to carry on their legacy. And at this point in time, I was not medically qualified to fly in space because I'd had an injury in the neutral buoyancy lab, which was this huge pool, 6 million gallon pool that we trained to do spacewalks. And I went down in the water in this training session and ended up losing all of my hearing. And as an astronaut, you kind of need your hearing to fly in space, But then when I worked in education, did this thing and helped the families come back, and then they finally put me back on flight status. And I had a chance to fly in space, 2008, 2009.
I just want to deviate from the script for a moment here and pick up on something that David just spoke about. Well, two things actually. One, the influence or the environment of coming from a small town, because you grew up in a fairly small town, right? About that. And also as well, just to kind of get your take on what he was saying about, the 10,000 hour rule versus trainability versus what I would venture from what you're saying is also luck. Because you sound like a pretty lucky guy. You've had some pretty lucky breaks. So just give me your take on that kind of like mix and how all of that has influenced you.
Right. Well, I mean, I never specialized in anything like he was talking about where in the larger cities, kids are specializing much faster. I played football, basketball, and tennis. And my mom got me interested in science, and I played piano and music and all these different things. And I think, I had never, in my mind, thought of myself as being a pro ball player one day. So did I get 10,000 hours in each of my sports? I don't think I did. But it was that ability to know that you can do any of these things because you have sampled a lot of different things.
And did you feel naturally gifted as a young man, as a youth playing sports? Did it just come easy to you?
Gifted. I mean, I was fast. I wasn't that big. I was a small kid. I was much smaller than the other kids. But I like to, hit people, really hard. So I think I had a speed. Speed was my biggest asset, I think. But I didn't feel like I was overly, more gifted than any of the other kids that I was playing with.
And the environment. Tell me a little bit about the small town environment, because as David mentioned, this is not something that had occurred to me before he mentioned it, but it kind of makes sense in a way now, because I suppose if you're a kind of big fish in a small pond, you gain a lot of benefits from just being another, facing the crowd of millions of people in a big city where, as he says, there's this kind of like, do it, mentality. Yeah, what was it like growing up in small town Virginia, right?
Yeah, I think because in a small town you kind of have to do everything. I mean, like my dad expected me to cut the grass, my mom expected me to wash the dishes. You were expected to do all these different things. As a football player, I played both ways, wide receiver and defensive back. So, and I kind of parallel that to flying in space. When you're in space, if the toilet breaks, you've got to fix it. I mean, there's not a specialist trained to fix the toilet. So I think, that if doing all these different things, you can really do anything that you put your mind to if that belief is put in you. And I think when you specialize very early, you only think that you're good at that one thing. And so the mindset is, well, if I fail at this sport, then I can't do anything else, and you maybe give up on other things faster. But I think the smaller town, you're expected to do many things besides being a specialist, because sometimes the teams aren't big enough to have you, not play both ways.
Yeah. And this is something that also came out of your family environment, right? Because am I right in saying that you helped your dad convert a bread truck into a RV or something?
Yeah.
Or what?
How many of you have been camping before? Many of you have been camping in trailers and RVs and things. Well, my parents were middle school teachers, so they didn't have a lot of money. So I remember one summer, my dad drives his bread truck into the driveway, and he says, "Hey, this is our camper." I'm like, "No, that's a Merita bread truck. It's got Merita bread on the side of the truck." I'm like, "That's not a camper, that's a bread truck." And over the course of that summer, we turned that truck into an RV. We put a toilet in there. I did electrical engineering. We wired it. We did mechanical engineering. I built bunk beds that swung down. Chemical engineering. We piped in propane to a Coleman stove. So this bread truck turned into our camper. And again, you were a generalist. You weren't specialized in just doing the stove. I was creating and building everything. And I think having that mindset that even though my dad was a school teacher, not a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, we could do anything if you just tried to do it. You know, it was that belief. And again, small town.
Yeah. And were you typical of the kind of small town kid, or were you cut from some other kind of stuff? Because I guess what I'm trying to
get
to...
the right stuff?
The right stuff is, and I think many of us here often in our moments of existential crisis kind of ponder the ideas about, am I blessed, am I lucky, am I a grafter, why that hasn't it happened to me, it's happened to him, etc., etc. So I suppose in some ways, and what fascinates me about meeting people like yourself is trying to, by osmosis, get some of that kind of where does that success come from?
I think the right stuff is the not giving up stuff. It's like when you fail and you fail and you fail again and you keep going. I mean, I had pulled a hamstring, I dropped a touchdown pass, but I kept going. I was told I was medically disqualified to fly in space, but I kept going. I stayed with the program, I didn't quit. If you go to the next slide, I mean, I think about working with people from around the world. Next slide, go to the next slide. We had African American, Asian American, French, German, Russian, the first female commander on the International Space Station, working together as one team. People that we used to fight against, working together as one community. And I think people not giving up and believing that they can take it to the next level.
Yeah, as a former, and I say a former with a very small f, professional boxer, as the author Joyce Carol Oates wrote about boxing, that it's about failure far more than it is about success. Right. And of course, we often associate sports like boxing with this kind of rocky Hollywood narrative of the guy who, his head is hanging off of his shoulders, he's on the canvas, he's down and he's out, but he manages to summon up something to drag himself up off the canvas and turn it around. And I think at this point here, I should say that I suppose the hidden agenda for me is that it's not just a case of being fascinated about it for purely personal reasons. As someone who also works in education, I'm really interested in this, and I want to get onto this because you do a lot of work in education, and we'll get to in a moment, of course, the big idea that you've got in terms of education, space, and technology. Is how do you communicate that idea of dedication, of graft, of bounce back ability to young people who I'm sure you're often coming into contact with are they're challenged economically, socially. Giving up is often an easy option. How do you get through to people like that?
I think go back into communities, and young kids in the hood usually see the way out is through sports or music. And that's the only path or avenue that they have. When you tell the stories of your failures or the times that you've had to, redevelop or reconstitute yourself into something else to take it to the next level, they sometimes do understand that. They see failure in athletes. They see people, having injuries, but then working hard to get back into their training and themselves getting back. The other thing that I think is really important to show them is just the integrity and the honesty in trying to do the right thing, showing them that there's good in doing the right thing, because eventually the bad thing will lead you astray and somewhere else. The other thing that I want to share with them is believing in something bigger than yourself. And on the next slide is a picture that I took of the planet. As you go around the planet every 90 minutes, you see a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes. And you get this shift in the change in you. It's called an orbital perspective or orbital shift. When you see the planet from that vantage point, it just fundamentally changes you. And trying to relay that back to the youth and the young kids that you are part of something that's much bigger than yourself. Don't just be myopic and think of what you can do for yourself. Think of what you can do for others and for the planet to help sustain our planet.
Now, this is a really fascinating point, about changing yourself. And I know it's still pretty early on a Tuesday. It is Tuesday, isn't it? I know some of you, quite a few people I can see by the bleary eyes were partying last night as well. So I don't want to get too heavy at the moment, but I've heard it said, and I think Buzz Aldrin famously spoke about the philosophical, the spiritual effect it had on him, being able to see the earth in its entirety from a distance.
Right.
Right. Rock my world, rock our world. Tell me about it, because you just mentioned this thing about change within. What are you talking about? Are you talking about spiritual experience?
So you're sitting, you get to orbit, and you undo your seatbelt, and now you're floating in space, and you float over to the window, and you look at the planet, and as you go around it, you see that there are no borders down there. I was flying over Afghanistan and Iraq and all these places where I know that there's stuff going on down there. And I'm doing this with people that we used to fight against, Germany, and we had Russian cosmonauts on the vehicle with us. And to sit there in this vehicle and float food from each other, breaking bread at this orbital outpost with people used to fight against, it just really fundamentally changes the way you view humanity. And to think that I see fires burning in the Amazon, I think of, sediment coming down the Nile, and think about how we are just trashing our planet if we don't do something about this. And I have this grand bird's eye view of the entire planet from that vantage point. Buzz Aldrin had the view from the moon, looking back at this blue marble, and to think that, this little blue thing out there is our spaceship. This is what's keeping us alive. And in the bigger cosmic picture, it's just a very, very small little thing out there that we're sitting on. The world-rocking piece is, if a 10-kilometer diameter asteroid came and hit our planet, it would be one of those dinosaur-ending moments. But now, with humans here, it would be the human-ending moment. So what do we do if that 10-kilometer diameter asteroid came and wiped us out? Would we be over? Would we only be living on the space station? Would we have a lunar base? Would we have a Martian base? So that's the whole piece of exploration, is to ensure that we keep our civilization advanced and moving forward by having further space exploration. And I think once we stop exploring as a civilization, we will falter.
Are you a religious person?
I am a religious person.
You are?
Yeah.
You believe in God?
I do believe in God.
What effect has being in space had on your belief, on your belief system?
The people that don't have faith that go to space, some of them get faith when they look at the planet. The people that have faith that go there, it can become stronger, and it did for me. So just looking back at that vantage point, looking out into the stars and the heavens, and it's life changing. Once you get there and see that.
I just want to, as a show of hands, for a moment here, who, if they had the opportunity to go into space, would take it? Okay, so that's...
A few.
That's a few.
The rest of you can get out.
I asked that because, well, I want to
Virgin Galactic.
Well, yeah, and of course we have to deal with that, of course. But I wanted to get onto before that, you know, as I was saying before, I intimated your big idea, because after 24 years of public service with NASA, you retired earlier in the year to set up space education grants.
Right.
As a means of, when I first came across this, I thought to myself, wow, this is like a cosmic version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It's like, you know, some lucky person out there is going to get, and this is just pure tabloid journalism speaking here, right?
Okay.
And you'll explain it far more eloquently than I will. But this idea that for starters, 1 out of 50,000 people would be given the opportunity
to fly in space.
It just, I want to know first, are you doing discounts on tickets for that?
Summit discounts.
Yeah. But tell me how that works. Talk us, you know, give us the extended picture. I know that you're not supposed to really be promoting stuff here.
But
anyway.
Well, Spaceship Earth grants, if you go sign up to apply, for 50,000 people that apply, we will give one person an opportunity to fly in space on a carrier of their choosing. So that's something we're trying to do. The additional resources will go for giving grants to companies and organizations that are trying to do good with our planet, as well as trying to do more things with STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And so this is a way that we can give back and help save our planet in a much more sustainable way, without getting too many details.
And what's the take-up been of this so far? Because you started this at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, we're still trying to. We have about 150 countries of people that have applied. We're going through another push now. You know, now with the Virgin Galactic thing happening, we're going to have to, you know, push it up a little bit more. And I think that's something we should definitely talk about. Space tourism. This is something that we should be doing, you know, and I'm a firm believer that, you know, the things that are hard to do, we should keep trying to do. The people that have, you know, given money to pay for those seats with Virgin, I think they're going to figure out what the problem was and come back around. But it's something that we as a civilization have to do to continue to advance ourselves.
Yeah, because, I mean, it goes without saying that, you know, in the space of a week, we had the Virgin Galactic incident and also the Antares rocket as well. Fortunately, there were no fatalities in that, but it was a bit of an embarrassment for, you know, the commercial space industry. I mean, how do you deal with those inevitable risks? Because as we were discussing, you know, before we came on stage, you know, this is a very risky business.
Right. Well, in the industry, I mean, the first cars that were built, the first airplanes that were built, there were, you know, obviously fatalities, and this is kind of a nascent commercial, you know, space community trying to get their feet on the ground. You will have those types of failures. I mean, in the NASA space program, Apollo 1 fire on the pad. We lost space shuttle Challenger in '86, and then in 2003 we lost Columbia. So you can have a space vehicle that's been tried, true, and tested through its phases, but, you know, 2 million moving parts. There are things that can just happen, and I think that's part of doing business in this community, is in knowing that these types of things can happen. We're trying to perfect things. We're trying to build things to the best, you know, tolerances and abilities that we can. Lots of it sometimes has to do with resources, how much resources were spent on the testing and the phases of testing. But it's something I still think we must do as a civilization.
Right. Okay. I see that man, we've eaten up that clock. I mean, I want to monopolize your time further, but I think I owe it to those people that did say they would go into space to ask you a question or two. Anyone got any questions at all from me? Hey.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been so enjoyable. Oh my goodness, I didn't know that it was still possible for someone
Well, so the big idea is to do, we're gonna do astronaut training, but in this training, we're gonna have the ability for teachers to actually fly on parabolic flights to where the teachers can actually do their kids' experiments in this 767 as they do multiple parabolas, working with education entities from all around the planet to try to do project-based learning. So we're trying to see how we can maybe get kids more inspired and more motivated to do more things around using something that inspires people when they look up in the night sky is space.
How can we help?
Call me. SpaceshipEarthGrants.com. Check it out.
Any more questions? No?
All right.
They are hungover.
Yeah. It feels great. But I think if more people could have that perspective and seeing the planet from that vantage point, it just would help. I think if we send more politicians up there to have a chance to look at the planet and look at how their laws and things are affecting us, would be a better place for our civilization to help us be more sustained. But you should take a look up there. I think you would like it. Earth is good too, though.
Excellent.
All right.
Okay, I think we have just about
Awesome.
exhausted our time here on stage. But Leland, it's been awesome talking to you. And
Likewise.
we're going to get off stage. I'm going to bug you some more about this stuff. But thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Thank you, David. All right. Thanks, guys.